The winter wind off Lake Michigan was brutal enough to cut through bone, but it was nothing compared to the chill inside Leone's whenever Dominic Vance walked through the door. It was a Tuesday, typically a slow night for the high-end Italian steakhouse located just off Wacker Drive. The restaurant was a cavern of mahogany velvet and low golden lighting, a place where politicians shook hands with union leaders and where dirty money was laundered through $500 bottles of Barolo. Daisy Jenkins stood by the service station, nervously smoothing the front of her black apron. She was 24, with tired eyes and hands that were chapped from working 3 jobs. She had only been at Leone's for a week. To her, this wasn't a career. It was a lifeline. With her father's gambling debts hovering over her family like a guillotine, and her younger brother Toby needing tuition for community college, Daisy needed the tips. She needed this job to work. But tonight, the atmosphere in the kitchen was frantic. "He's here," whispered distinctively terrified voice. It was Mr. Henderson, the floor manager. Henderson was a man who usually projected an air of pompous authority, but right now he looked like a man marching to the gallows. He was wiping sweat from his receding hairline with a linen napkin. "Who is here?" Daisy asked, stacking bread plates. "Vance," hissed Cargo, a veteran waiter with 20 years of experience. "Dominic Vance, the capo. He's early. His usual table isn't even prepped." Daisy frowned. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago who read the crime columns knew the name Vance. They were construction waste management and shipping, allegedly. In reality, they were the reason bodies washed up in the Chicago River. "So we seat him," Daisy said, grabbing a pitcher of water. "It's a restaurant, Carlo. He eats food like everyone else." Carlo grabbed her wrist, his grip hard. "No, you listen to me, ragazza. You don't look him in the eye. You don't ask him how his day was. You pour the wine, you take the order, and you disappear. Last month, a runner spilled a drop of sauce near his cuff. That runner didn't get fired. He just stopped coming to work." "I can take the table," Daisy said. She didn't want to be brave, but she saw the paralyzing fear in Henderson's eyes. If the manager panicked, the service would crash and nobody would make money. Daisy couldn't afford a bad night. "I'll do it. Just give me the wine list." Henderson looked at her, as if she had volunteered to defuse a bomb with a hammer. "You're new. You don't know." "I know I need the tips, Mr. Henderson. Let me work." Without waiting for permission, Daisy grabbed the leather-bound menus and pushed through the swinging double doors into the dining room. The change in the room was palpable. Usually Leone's was filled with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware. Now a hush had fallen over the main floor. Guests were eating quickly, keeping their heads down. At table 4, the prime booth in the back corner, with a clear view of both exits, sat 3 men. 2 were clearly muscle-broad-shouldered, wearing suits that strained at the biceps, scanning the room with predatory boredom. And in the center sat Dominic Vance. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Perhaps a little sharper, a little colder. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Daisy's entire year of rent. He had dark hair, swept back, a strong jawline, covered in a day's worth of stubble, and eyes that were the color of slate gray, flat, and completely unreadable. He was reading a message on his phone, completely ignoring the terrified room around him. Daisy took a breath, steeling herself. "Just a customer," she repeated internally. "Just a man with a wallet." She approached the table. The 2 bodyguards stiffened immediately, their eyes locking onto her hands. Daisy didn't flinch. She walked right up to the edge of the table. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Welcome to Leone's. My name is Daisy, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." The bodyguards looked at Dominic. Dominic didn't look up from his phone. "Sparkling water. No ice," Dominic said. His voice was deep rough like gravel. He still hadn't looked at her. "And bring the 15 Ornelia. Open it at the bar, not here." He waved his hand, a dismissive, arrogant flick of the wrist, a gesture you would use to shoo away a fly. Daisy felt a flash of irritation. She was used to rude customers. She had worked in diners and dive bars before this. But something about his total erasure of her existence stung. "Certainly," Daisy said. "Would you like to hear the specials before I get the wine?" Dominic finally looked up. The contact was electric. His eyes were cold assessing. He looked at her not as a person, but as an object that was malfunctioning. "Did I ask for the specials?" he asked softly. The dining room seemed to hold its breath. "No," Daisy replied, holding his gaze. "But the osso buco is excellent tonight, and the chef has prepared a fresh sea bass that isn't on the menu." One of the bodyguards, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, leaned forward. "The boss said water and wine. Go get it." "I heard him," Daisy said, not breaking eye contact with Dominic. "I'm just doing my job." Dominic stared at her for a long, uncomfortable second. Then a corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. It was a crack in the ice. "Water. Wine," Dominic repeated slowly. "Go." Daisy turned on her heel and walked away, her back straight. As she reached the safety of the service station, her hands began to shake. "You're insane," Carlo whispered, appearing beside her to load a tray. "You talked back to him." "I upsold him," Daisy muttered, grabbing the sparkling water. "If he's going to be a jerk, he's going to pay for the expensive fish." She didn't know it yet, but Dominic Vance was watching her walk away, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business. The meal proceeded in a tense silence. Daisy served the appetizers calamari and beef carpaccio with mechanical precision. Every time she approached the table, the bodyguards watched her jugular, but Dominic barely acknowledged her presence. He ate slowly, sipping the expensive wine, occasionally murmuring instructions to the men flanking him. It was during the main course that things went wrong. Daisy was carrying a heavy tray containing 3 sizzling plates. The weight was substantial, straining her wrists. As she navigated the narrow path between tables, a customer at table 5, a loud, intoxicated tourist, abruptly shoved his chair back to stand up. The chair leg caught Daisy's ankle. It happened in slow motion. Daisy stumbled forward. She twisted her body violently to avoid dropping the hot plates onto the sitting customers. She managed to save the food, balancing the tray with a Herculean effort. But in the chaos, a single fork slid off a plate. It flew through the air and landed with a soft clink right on the table in front of Dominic Vance. A tiny droplet of sauce from the fork splattered onto the pristine white tablecloth just inches from his hand. The restaurant went dead silent. The drunk tourist gasped. Mr. Henderson, watching from the podium, closed his eyes as if waiting for a gunshot. Daisy stabilized herself, her heart dropping into her stomach. She looked at the table. The fork lay there like an accusation. Dominic slowly placed his wine glass down. He looked at the fork. Then he looked at the spot of sauce. Finally, he looked at Daisy. The bodyguard on the left started to rise his hand, reaching inside his jacket. "Sit down, Rico," Dominic said quietly. Rico froze and sat back down. Dominic picked up the fork. He held it up to the light. "You almost armed me, Daisy." "I tripped." Daisy said, her voice trembling slightly, but she refused to apologize profusely. She knew men like this. They fed on weakness. If she begged, he would crush her. A customer pushed his chair out. I saved the steaks. You saved the steaks. Dominic repeated, his tone unreadable. But you dropped a fork. Gravity is a law, not a suggestion, sir, she said. Henderson was practically sprinting over now, pale as a sheet. Mr. Vance, I am so sorry. This girl is new, she's clumsy, Daisy, get to the kitchen right now. I'll take over. Henderson grabbed Daisy's arm, his fingers digging in hard, trying to pull her away. Go, he hissed at her. Daisy flinched at the pain in her arm. Let go. I can finish I said. Leave her alone. Dominic's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Henderson released Daisy instantly, stepping back as if burned. Dominic looked at the manager with pure disgust. She saved the food. She didn't drop the tray, and you put your hands on her. Dominic stood up. He was taller than he looked while sitting well over 6 feet, looming over the table. He reached into his jacket pocket. The entire restaurant flinched. He pulled out a money clip. He peeled off 5 crisp $100 bills and dropped them onto the sauce-stained tablecloth. For the dry cleaning, Dominic said to the room in general. Then he peeled off another 10 bills, $1,000. He held them out to Daisy. Daisy stared at the money. It was more than she made in 2 weeks. It was the electricity bill and part of the debt interest. But her pride burned hot in her chest. I don't want your charity, Daisy said quietly. It's not charity, Dominic said, stepping closer to her. He smelled of sandalwood tobacco and cold rain. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his grey eyes. It's hazard pay. Nobody stands up to Henderson, and nobody stands up to me. He took her hand, forced the money into her palm, and closed her fingers over it. His hand was rough, warm, and terrifyingly strong. What time does your shift end? He asked. Why? Daisy challenged, pulling her hand back. Because, Dominic said, leaning in, so only she could hear, the man who tripped you. He's been watching you all night. And he's not a tourist. You should be careful, Daisy Jenkins. The city isn't safe for brave little things like you. Before she could process what he meant, Dominic signaled his men. We're leaving. Wrap the food. He walked out without looking back, his long coat billowing behind him. Daisy stood there, clutching the $1,000, her heart racing. She looked over at table 5. The drunk tourist was gone. He had vanished the moment Dominic stood up. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't just a rude customer. She had just stepped into something far darker than she realized. Later that night, as Daisy exited the back alley door of Leone's, clutching her coat tight against the wind, she saw a black SUV idling at the corner. The window rolled down just an inch. She didn't stop. She walked faster toward the bus stop. But as she sat on the bus heading toward her cramped apartment in the South Side, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Check your pocket. Daisy frowned. She reached into her apron pocket, which she had stuffed into her coat. Her fingers brushed against something hard and cold. She pulled it out. It was a black business card. No name. Just a symbol of a lion embossed in gold and a phone number. And on the back, written in elegant, sharp handwriting. For when you realize you need help. Daisy stared at the card. She wanted to throw it away. She wanted to pretend tonight never happened. But then she thought of her brother Toby and the debt collectors who had called yesterday threatening to break his legs. She put the card back in her pocket. Dominic Vance, hadn't just tipped her. He had marked her. The bus ride to the south side was a 40-minute decompression chamber of flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of wet wool. Daisy sat near the back, her forehead resting against the cold glass, watching the city shift from the glittering skyscrapers of the Loop to the low, huddled brick bungalows of her neighborhood. The $1,000 Dominic Vance had forced into her hand felt heavy in her pocket, like a stone that was slowly heating up. It was a fortune. It was also a target. She got off at 47th Street, clutching her purse tight to her chest. The wind here didn't howl. It bit. It whistled through the cracked pavement and the boarded-up storefronts. Daisy walked quickly, head down, navigating the familiar geography of poverty. Avoid the corner by the liquor store. Cross the street before the flickering streetlight. Don't make eye contact with the idling sedan. When she reached her apartment building, a 3-story walk-up with peeling beige paint, she exhaled a breath she felt she'd been holding since she left Lyon's. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs, the scent of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke growing stronger with every step. At apartment 3B, she unlocked the 3 deadbolts and slipped inside. "Toby," she called out softly. The apartment was small, essentially, a hallway that pretended to be a living room with 2 tiny bedrooms branching off. But it was clean. Daisy made sure of that. No matter how tired she was, she scrubbed the floors. Poverty was unavoidable. Filth was a choice. "In here," a voice cracked from the 2nd bedroom. Daisy walked in to find her 19-year-old brother hunched over a drafting table they had salvaged from a majestic Goodwill haul. Toby was sketching his hand, moving furiously across the paper. He was talented, brilliant, actually, at graphic design. But talent didn't pay the rent, and it certainly didn't pay their father's debts. "You're home late," Toby said, looking up. He had the same dark hair as Daisy, but his eyes were softer, unhardened by the jobs Daisy had to work. "I was worried." "It was a busy night," Daisy lied. She walked over and kissed the top of his head. "Did you eat?" "Made pasta. Left you some." Toby paused, his pencil hovering over the paper. "Dad called." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daisy stiffened. "What did he want?" "He said he needs 2,000 by Friday." "Or..." Toby swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Or he said Kovac is going to send someone to the apartment. Daisy, who is Kovac?" Daisy felt a wave of nausea. Kovac was a loan shark who operated out of a scrapyard in the industrial district. He was a man who didn't deal in interest rates. He dealt in broken bones. "Don't worry about it," Daisy said, her voice sharp. Dad is exaggerating. I'll handle it." "How?" Toby stood up, frustration etching lines into his young face. "You're waiting tables, Daisy. I'm trying to find freelance work, but I said I'll handle it." She snapped, then immediately regretted it. She softened her voice. "Look, I had a good night tonight. A really good night. We're okay." She reached into her pocket to show him the cash to prove that miracles happened. Thud. The sound came from the front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a heavy, dull impact like a boot hitting wood. Daisy and Toby froze. Thud. The wood of the door frame groaned. "Get in the closet," Daisy whispered, pushing Toby. Her survival instincts, honed by years of dealing with their father's mess, kicked into overdrive. "Daisy, no, now!" She shoved him toward his closet and slammed the door shut, piling a laundry basket in front of it. She ran back to the main room, just as the front door flew open with a splintering crash. The lock didn't just break. The jam shattered. Two men stepped into the apartment. They were large, wearing heavy winter coats that added to their bulk. Daisy recognized the one on the left. It was the tourist from Lyons, the man Dominic had warned her about. He wasn't drunk now. His eyes were clear, cold, and dead. "Daisy Jenkins," the man said. His voice was flat, devoid of any accent or emotion. "And the brother? Where is the brother?" "He's not here," Daisy said, standing in the middle of her tiny kitchen, grabbing the handle of a cast-iron skillet from the drying rack. She held it with both hands, trembling, but ready to swing. "Get out of my house!" The second man, a brute with a shaved head and a neck tattoo of a scorpion, laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound. "She's got a frying pan, Mick. I'm terrified." Mick, the fake tourist, didn't laugh. He stepped forward, kicking a kitchen chair out of his way. "Your father Frank took a loan. 10,000. He paid back 2. He missed the collection yesterday." "I don't have $10,000, Daisy said, backing up until her hips hit the counter. "We know," Mick said, "but we know you work at Lyons now. Fancy place. Good tips." He took another step. He was too close now. Daisy could smell him stale coffee and violence. "Kovac likes a payment plan," Mick continued. "But since Frank is hard to find, we figure the children can pay. Every week you give us 80% of your tips. If you don't..." Mick looked toward the bedrooms. "If you don't, we break the boy's hands. Hard to draw with smashed fingers, isn't it?" Daisy swung the skillet. It was a desperate, pulled swing. Mick caught her wrist mid-air with terrifying ease. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing a cry of pain from her lips, and slammed her face first into the kitchen counter. "Don't be stupid," Mick whispered into her ear. He pressed her face harder against the cold laminate. "We'll be at the restaurant every Friday night to collect. If you tell the management, we hurt the boy. If you call the cops, we kill the boy." He released her. Daisy slumped to the floor, gasping, clutching her wrist. Mick reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo. He tossed it onto the floor next to her. It was a picture of Toby taken through the window of this very apartment just yesterday. "Friday, Daisy," Mick said. The two men turned and walked out, leaving the front door hanging off its hinges, letting the freezing Chicago winter pour into the room. Daisy sat on the linoleum floor, her body shaking violently. She wasn't crying. She was past tears. She was in the cold, hard place where survival decisions are made. She waited until she heard their footsteps fade down the stairs. Then she crawled over to her coat, which had fallen off the hook during the scuffle. She dug into the pocket and pulled out the black card with the gold lion, for when you realize you need help. She looked at the shattered door. She looked at the bedroom where her brother was hiding. She dialed the number. The phone rang only once. "Yes." A male voice answered. Not Dominic. It sounded like the bodyguard, Rico. "This is Daisy Jenkins," she said, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. "He gave me this number." There was a pause. Hold. 10 seconds of silence. Then the gravelly, deep voice that had haunted her thoughts for the last 4 hours. "You called sooner than I expected," Dominic Vance said. "I thought you'd wait at least 24 hours. "They broke down my door," Daisy said. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "They threatened my brother. Kovac's men." "Yes, a man named Mick." "I know him," Dominic said. The line crackled with a low static. "Are you safe right now?" "I don't know." "Go to the window," Dominic instructed. "Look down at the street. Tell me what you see." Daisy stood up, her legs wobbly, and moved to the window. She pulled back the cheap curtain. There's a black sedan. It's been idling there for 10 minutes. "That's my car," Dominic said. "I sent them to follow you when you left the restaurant. I figured Kovac might make a move tonight. My men are outside. You're safe." Daisy felt a complex mix of relief and violation. He had had her followed. "Come downstairs," Dominic said. "Bring the brother if you want, or leave him with my men. But you need to come see me." "Where?" "The driver will take you." The line went dead. Daisy spent 5 minutes explaining a sanitized version of events to a terrified Toby, telling him the men outside were private security. She hired a lie he barely bought, and that he was to lock the bedroom door and not come out. She ran down the stairs and out into the cold. The back door of the black sedan opened before she even reached it. The drive took 30 minutes. They didn't go to Leone's. They went into the heart of the financial district, pulling up to the rear entrance of an imposing limestone building that looked like a bank from the 1920s. The driver, a silent man with a neck thick as a tree trunk, escorted her to a private elevator. There were no buttons. He used a key card. The elevator rose smoothly, opening directly into a penthouse that looked less like a home and more like a fortress of solitude wrapped in luxury. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, glittering like a field of diamonds. The floor was dark marble. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth, but it gave off no smoke, only heat. Dominic Vance stood by the window holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He had shed his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar sleeves, rolled up to reveal forearms that were corded with muscle and marked with a faint, faded scar running down the left ulna. "Drink?" he asked, not turning around. "No," Daisy said, standing near the elevator doors. She felt incredibly small in this room, in her scuffed sneakers and cheap winter coat. Dominic turned. He took a sip of his bourbon, his grey eyes sweeping over her. He noticed the red mark on her cheek, where Mick had smashed her into the counter. His jaw tightened a subtle motion that made a mussel feather near his ear. "They touched you," he stated. It wasn't a question. "They wanted to make a point," Daisy said. "Sit." Dominic gestured to a leather armchair near the fire. Daisy didn't sit. "I didn't come here to socialize, Mr. Vance. You gave me a card. You said it was for when I needed help. Well, I need help. They want $10,000 or they're going to break my brother's hands." Dominic set his glass down on a side table. He walked toward her slowly. The predatory grace was back. "10,000 is nothing," he said softly. "I spend that on wine in a week." "Good for you," Daisy bit back. "For me, it's a life sentence." "I can make the debt go away," Dominic said, stopping just 2 feet from her. "I can make Kovac go away. I can make it so that the name Mick is never spoken in this city again." "And what do you want?" Daisy asked. She looked him dead in the eye. "Men like you don't do favors, you do transactions." Dominic smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him. It was terrifyingly attractive. "You're smart. I like that." He walked around her, circling her like a shark. "You're right. I don't give charity. I buy assets." He stopped behind her, leaning in close enough that his breath stirred the hair near her ear. "I don't need your money, Daisy. I have enough money to burn this city down and rebuild it in gold. What I need is someone who isn't afraid of me." Daisy turned to face him. "Everyone is afraid of you." "Exactly," Dominic said. "Fear makes people stupid. It makes them lie. It makes them useless to me. But you stood at my table, looked me in the eye, and told me to wait for my wine. You have a spine." He walked back to his desk, a massive slab of obsidian, and picked up a file. "I have a problem," Dominic said, his voice turning strictly business. "There is a leak in my organization. Information is getting out to the police and to my rivals. It's someone close to me, someone who sits at my tables, eats my food, and smiles at my face." He tossed the file onto the desk. "I need a fresh pair of eyes, someone nobody suspects, someone the boys will ignore because she's just the help. I need a waitress who can listen." Daisy stared at him. "You want me to spy for you?" "At Leona's, not just at Leona's," Dominic said. "I have private events, dinners, poker games. I need a personal server, someone I can trust to pour the scotch and remember who said what when they think no one is listening. And if I say no?" Dominic shrugged. "Then you go back home. You deal with Kovac. You hope your brother learns to draw with his left hand." It was cruel. It was cold. But it was the reality. Daisy thought of Toby. She thought of the fear in his eyes when he hid in the closet. She thought of the sound of the door splintering. "If I do this," Daisy said, her voice shaking, "Kovac is gone forever." "Kovac will be a bad memory by morning," Dominic promised. "And my brother, he stays out of this. He never sees you. He never sees this world." "Done. And the debt? I'll buy it," Dominic said. "You won't owe Kovac a dime." He stepped closer, closing the distance again. The air between them crackled with a strange, heavy tension. "But understand this, Daisy," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Once I buy your debt, you don't owe him anymore. You owe me. You belong to the Vance family until I say the debt is paid. And I am a much more demanding creditor than Kovac." Daisy looked at the scar on his arm, then up into his slate-grey eyes. She was stepping off a cliff. She knew it. "When do I start?" she whispered. Dominic reached out. For a second, she thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he reached past her and pressed a button on the wall. The elevator doors slid open. "Tomorrow night," Dominic said. "Wear black. And Daisy." She paused at the elevator. "Yes. Don't ever drop a fork in my house again." Daisy stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off the view of the penthouse, she saw Dominic Vance turn back to the window, watching the city he ruled, and now the woman he owned. The dress arrived at her apartment at 4 p.m. the next day. There was no note, just a garment bag, emblazoned with the logo of a boutique on Oak Street, where appointments were mandatory and prices were never listed. Daisy unzipped the bag in her dim living room. Inside was a black cocktail dress. It was modest, high neck, long sleeves, but the fit was predatory. It was designed to cling to every curve, turning the wearer into a silhouette. Alongside it was a pair of heels that looked like weapons, and a simple instruction sent via text, Leone's. Private room 2, 7:00 p.m. Listen. When Daisy walked into the back of Leone's that evening, the kitchen staff stopped. Even Carlo, who usually had a comment for everything, went silent. She wasn't wearing her apron. She wasn't one of them anymore. She had crossed the invisible line that separated the staff from the family. Mr. Henderson looked at her with a mixture of confusion and fear. He opened his mouth to bark an order, then saw the dress and the way she held her head. He snapped his mouth shut and pointed toward the heavy oak door at the back of the restaurant. Daisy took a breath, smoothed the fabric over her hips, and pushed the door open. Private Room 2 was a world away from the main dining floor. The air here was heavy, smelling of aged leather, expensive cologne, and thick cigar smoke. The walls were lined with dark walnut, and the only light came from a crystal chandelier, dimmed to a low amber glow. At the round table sat 5 men. Dominic was at the head, his back to the wall. He was wearing a black dress shirt, the top button undone, looking relaxed but alert, like a panther lounging in a tree. To his right was Rico. To his left were 3 men Daisy didn't recognize, older, heavier, with eyes that shifted constantly. "Gentlemen," Dominic said, not rising. His eyes locked onto Daisy's. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, approval hunger. It was gone too fast to tell. "This is Daisy. She will be handling our needs tonight. She is exclusive to this table." One of the men, a thick-necked capo named Salvatore with a diamond pinky ring, leaned back and grinned. His teeth were stained with tobacco. "New talent, Dom. She's a little skinny for my taste, but she's got eyes like a doe." "She's not for your taste, Sal," Dominic said. His voice was soft, barely a whisper, but the temperature in the room plummeted. "She's for the pouring of the wine. Look at the bottle, not the girl." Salvatore's grin faltered. He cleared his throat and looked down at his cards. "Right. The wine." Daisy moved to the sideboard. Her hands were trembling, but she forced them to be steady. She had opened thousands of bottles of wine. Corkscrew in twist, leverage, pop. A silent, smooth motion. She began to circle the table, filling glasses. She moved like a ghost. This was her superpower, the invisibility of the service industry. People didn't see the waiter. They saw the floating hand that refilled their drink. As she poured, she listened. "The shipment at the docks is delayed again." One of the men, a nervous guy named Paulie, muttered. "Customs is crawling all over Pier 4. Someone tipped them off about the crates." "Maybe you just pack sloppy, Paulie," Salvatore sneered, flicking ash onto the floor. "Dom, we're bleeding money on the unions. We need to push back." "We don't push until we know where the leak is," Dominic said, watching the amber liquid swirl in his glass. "If we push, we expose ourselves. We wait." "Waiting is weak," Salvatore challenged. The room went dead silent. "You didn't call Dominic Vance weak." Dominic slowly turned his head toward Salvatore. "Patience is a weapon, Sal. Impatience is how you end up in a landfill." Daisy was pouring water into Salvatore's glass. As she leaned in, Salvatore's hand shot out. He grabbed her wrist hard. His fingers were fleshy and hot. "Sweetheart," Salvatore said, ignoring Dominic's glare. "You missed a spot. My glass is dirty." It was a power move. He was testing Dominic's authority by touching what Dominic had claimed. Daisy froze. The pain in her wrist was sharp, reminding her of the bruise Mick had left the night before. But she didn't pull away. She stared down at Salvatore. "The glass is crystal, sir." Daisy said, her voice steady and cool. "If it looks dirty, perhaps it's the reflection of the person holding it." Paulie gasped. Rico choked on his water. Salvatore's face turned a violent shade of red. He squeezed her wrist harder, ready to snap the bone. "You little click!" The sound was small, mechanical, and terrifying. Dominic had placed a silver handgun on the table. He hadn't pointed it. He just set it down next to his wine glass, as casually as a spoon. "Let go of her, Sal," Dominic said. He sounded bored. "Or you'll be eating your dinner through a straw." Salvatore froze. He looked at the gun. He looked at Dominic's flat grey eyes. He released Daisy's wrist instantly. Just a joke, boss, Salvatore muttered, wiping his sweaty palms on his napkin. Just having fun. Daisy, Dominic said, not looking away from Salvatore. Come here. Daisy walked around the table to Dominic's side. Give me your hand, he commanded. She extended her hand. Dominic took it. His grip was firm but gentle. He turned her wrist over, inspecting the red marks Salvatore's fingers had left on her pale skin. He ran his thumb over the skin, a touch that sent a jolt of electricity straight to Daisy's core. It was possessive. It was intimate. Rico, Dominic said softly. Get ice for her wrist. I'm fine, Daisy whispered. You're not fine. Dominic corrected her, looking up into her eyes. The intensity of his gaze made her knees weak. You are my asset. Nobody damages my assets. Stand behind my chair for the rest of the night. If anyone needs a drink, they can ask you from there. Daisy stood behind him for the next 2 hours, her back against the walnut paneling. She watched everything. She watched who drank too much poorly. She watched who stayed sober, Dominic and Rico. And she watched Salvatore. She noticed that every time the conversation turned to the shipping routes, Salvatore didn't look at Dominic. He looked at his watch. And every time he looked at his watch, he tapped his left foot 3 times. It was a nervous tick, or a signal. By the time the meeting ended and the men filed out. Leaving the room thick with tension, Daisy knew one thing for certain. Salvatore wasn't just rude. He was terrified. The door closed behind the last man. The room was suddenly vast and quiet. Dominic remained seated. He hadn't moved since the others left. He picked up his glass of wine, which had remained untouched for the last hour, and took a slow sip. You can sit, he said. Daisy didn't sit. She walked over to the table and began stacking the dirty plates. It was a defense mechanism. Cleaning meant order. Order meant safety. Stop cleaning, Dominic said. The staff will do that. Sit. Daisy placed the plates down and sat in the chair Rico had vacated to Dominic's right. Her wrist throbbed. Tell me what you saw, Dominic said. He loosened his tie, pulling it free from his collar. He looked exhausted. For a moment, the mask of the invincible Don slipped, revealing a man carrying the weight of a crumbling kingdom. Paulie is an idiot, Daisy said bluntly. He drinks too much because he's scared of you, but he's loyal. He looks at you like a dog looks at its master. Dominic chuckled darkly. Accurate. And the others? The one in the grey suit. He's just there for the money. He barely listened. He just agreed with whoever spoke loudest. And Salvatore? Dominic asked. The name hung in the air. Daisy hesitated. This was the point of no return. If she spoke, she was condemning a man. If she was wrong, she was useless. He's the leak, Daisy said. Dominic didn't blink. Why? He didn't drink, Daisy said. He pretended to. He raised the glass to his lips every time you proposed a toast, but the liquid level never went down. He wanted to stay sharp. That's smart, not guilty, Dominic countered. He checked his watch 4 times. Daisy continued, her voice gaining confidence. At 7:15, 7:37:45, and 8 o'clock, exactly. Each time he tapped his foot. And he has 2 phones. Dominic's eyes narrowed. 2. He put his main phone on the table, but when he went to reach for his lighter, his jacket opened. There's a burner phone in his inside pocket. The light from the screen blinked once. It was recording. Dominic went very still. The air in the room seemed to vanish. He was recording the meeting. Yes? Daisy said. The light was green. Audio recording. Dominic stood up slowly. He walked over to the window that looked out onto the alleyway. He stood there for a long time, his silhouette framed against the brick wall outside. "Do you know what you just did, Daisy?" he asked quietly. "I did my job. You just signed a man's death warrant." Daisy felt a cold shiver run through her. She looked at her hands. They looked the same as they had this morning, but they felt stained. She thought of Salvatore grabbing her wrist. She thought of the way he looked at her. "He threatened me," Daisy said, her voice hard. "And he's betraying you. I don't feel bad." Dominic turned around. He looked at her with a new expression, respect. "Come here." He beckoned her to the window. Daisy stood and walked to him. He was standing close, the heat radiating off his body. "Look down," he said. Daisy looked out the window. In the alley below, under the yellow haze of a security light, she saw Salvatore walking toward his car. He was fumbling for his keys. Suddenly, two shadows detached themselves from the darkness. It was Rico and another man. Daisy wanted to look away, but she couldn't. It happened fast. There was no screaming, just a brief struggle, a flash of metal, and then Salvatore was being guided, dragged into the back of a waiting van. "He won't be coming back to Leone's," Dominic said. His voice was void of emotion. "Tonight we find out who he was recording for. Tomorrow the leak is plugged." He turned Daisy to face him. He placed his hands on her shoulders. His thumbs brushed against her collarbone, skimming the neckline of the black dress. "You have good eyes," Dominic murmured. "Dangerous eyes." "Is my debt paid?" Daisy asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was terrified of him, and yet she had never felt so alive. Dominic shook his head slowly. "The money." "Yes, that was pennies. But now you know my secrets, Daisy. You know how I operate. You know who dies and who lives." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could smell the bourbon on his breath. "You're in deep water now," he whispered. "You can't just walk away. If I let you go, my enemies will find you. They'll torture you to get to me. So I'm a prisoner." "No," Dominic said. His hand moved up to cup her jaw, tilting her head back. "You're protected. There's a difference." "It doesn't feel different," Daisy challenged him. Dominic's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The tension was unbearable, a magnetic pull that defied logic. "One day," Dominic said, his voice rough, "you'll realize that the safest place in this city is right here, standing next to the monster." He released her abruptly, stepping back as if he had been burned. "Rico is busy," Dominic said, adjusting his cuffs, the mask of the boss sliding back into place. "I'll drive you home myself." "That's not necessary." "It is," Dominic said, "because now that Salvatore is gone, whoever he was working for is going to be looking for the person who exposed him. You have a target on your back, Daisy." He opened the door of the private room, holding it for her. "Welcome to the family," he said grimly. Daisy walked out, the heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She realized with a sinking feeling that she wasn't just working for the mafia anymore. She was becoming part of it. And worse, she was starting to trust the man holding the gun. The interior of Dominic's car, a matte black Aston Martin, was a sanctuary of silence and leather. Outside the city of Chicago was a blur of wet pavement and streaking lights. But inside, the world felt suspended. Dominic drove with one hand on the wheel. His movements relaxed, yet precise. He didn't drive like a man in a hurry. He drove like a man who owned the road. Daisy sat in the passenger seat, watching his profile in the intermittent flashes of passing streetlights. "You're quiet," Dominic said, his eyes scanning the mirrors. "I'm processing," Daisy replied, leaning her head against the cool window. "Yesterday I was worried about paying the electric bill. Tonight I just watched a man get kidnapped, because I noticed he tapped his foot. You saved lives tonight, Daisy. Just not his. I saved your life, she corrected him. Dominic glanced at her, a faint smirk touching his lips. Maybe I should give you a raise. I don't want a raise. I want to know if this is my life now, looking over my shoulder, wondering who's recording me. Dominic downshifted as they approached a red light in a deserted industrial corridor near the river. The engine growled low and deep. You don't have to look over your shoulder, Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave. That's what I'm for. The light turned green. Dominic didn't move. Daisy frowned. Green means go, Dominic. Hold on, he said sharply. His relaxed demeanor vanished instantly. His muscles coiled tight beneath his shirt. He had seen something she hadn't. A sedan parked across the intersection had its lights off. Then blinding high beams flooded the cabin. Get down, Dominic roared. He slammed his hand onto Daisy's head, forcing her down toward the dashboard, just as the windshield shattered. Crack. 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 Bullets hammered into the reinforced glass. It didn't break, but it spider-webbed into 1,000 opaque diamonds. Dominic didn't panic. He threw the car into reverse tires, screaming against the asphalt, spinning the wheel with violent precision. The car fishtailed, swinging around 180 degrees. Stay down, he commanded. Another car screeched out from the alley behind them, blocking their retreat. It was a trap. Salvatore's backups had been waiting. 2 cars, 4 shooters. Dominic calculated aloud, his voice devoid of fear, filled only with cold, tactical rage. He reached under his seat and pulled out a submachine gun, sleek, black, and terrifying. Daisy, listen to me, he said, his hand gripping her shoulder hard. I'm going to open my door. When I do, you slide into the driver's seat. You drive. You don't stop for anything. You go to the police precinct on 35th. Do you understand? I'm not leaving you, Daisy screamed over the sound of bullets pinging off the armored door panels. Do as I say, Dominic snarled. It was the voice of the capo, the monster. He kicked his door open and rolled out onto the pavement, firing before he even hit the ground. The sound was deafening. Daisy curled into a ball, covering her ears. She heard shouting, the roar of engines, and the rhythmic thump-thump of Dominic's weapon answering the chaotic fire of the attackers. Then silence. It lasted for 10 seconds. To Daisy it felt like 10 years. Dominic, she whispered. No answer. She scrambled up, ignoring his orders, and looked out the shattered driver's side window. Dominic was standing in the middle of the street. The 2 enemy cars were riddled with holes, steam rising from their radiators. 3 men lay on the ground, motionless. Dominic stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving, his white shirt stained with oil and blood, though she couldn't tell if it was his. He looked terrifying. He looked like the god of war. He turned and walked back to the car. He holstered the weapon and opened the passenger door. Are you hit? He demanded, scanning her frantically. Check yourself. Any pain? Any blood? Daisy was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. I think I'm okay. You're bleeding. There was a graze on his cheek, a line of crimson running down to his jaw. It's nothing, he said. He reached in and unbuckled her seatbelt. Then, before she could react, he pulled her out of the car and crushed her against his chest. It wasn't a hug. It was a desperate claim. His arms wrapped around her like iron bands, burying his face in her hair. He smelled of gunpowder and copper, but underneath it, he still smelled like sandalwood. I told you, he whispered into her hair, his voice rough and shaking with adrenaline. Nobody touches you. Nobody. Daisy wrapped her arms around his waist, holding on for dear life. She realized then that there was no going back to the diner. No going back to the electric bills and the quiet life. She pulled back and looked up at him. The streetlights flickered overhead, illuminating the destruction around them. "You're crazy," she said, tears finally spilling over. Dominic wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb, smearing a trace of his own blood on her skin. A blood oath. "I'm a Vance," he said simply. "And you, Daisy Jenkins? You're mine now." He leaned down and kissed her. It was fierce tasting of danger and survival. It was a kiss that sealed her fate. As sirens began to wail in the distance, Dominic pulled away, grabbed her hand, and led her toward the driver's side. "Let's go home," he said. Daisy didn't ask which home. She knew, wherever he was, that was where she was going. She got into the car, the glass crunching under her feet, and prepared to ride into the darkness with the devil himself. And that is where we leave Daisy and Dominic, for now, standing in the wreckage of a failed ambush, their fates sealed in blood, and a single desperate kiss. Daisy started as a waitress, afraid to spill a drop of wine, and now she's riding shotgun with the most dangerous man in Chicago. But the war for the city is just beginning. Who sent the hit squad? What will happen when Dominic's rivals find out he has a weakness, and can Daisy really survive in a world where lovers is just another word for target practice?